Oh yeah, Benny Goodman, also known as the Neurotic Guitarist. What's up, dog?
How are you, dude? Thank you so much for having me on your program.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I love your channel. I love your stuff. Your energy is infectious, and your insights are just priceless. Not to mention, this is only a fraction of your guitar collection I'm seeing behind you. I think, isn't that right?
There's a whole other room over there, and then there is a storage room with some stuff. And I occasionally will trade kind of back and forth with a guy I curate, whose collection I curate. So he's got another like 80 or 90 guitars that we'll trade through the mail every once in a while. I'm bored of this one. Can you send me that one? Sure.
It doesn't matter how cool it is. The allure wears off at some point. Tell me about the neurotic guitarist. Is this self-proclaimed, or is this the general consensus that you are a neurotic guitarist?
Well, it'd be way lamer if I came up with the idea, like, oh, I'm going to call myself this. The idea was my friend Jim Foster, who's a really cool director. He's done a lot of videos for bands like Godsmack and Daughtry. And I think he just did something for the Hollywood Vampires. Um, he came to me one day. He's been playing in the music scene for years and years and a great producer. And he just said, dude, just listening to you talk about guitars, that's a thing, man. You tell stories, man. I should just get a camera and just like wind you up and let you go. And then, what would we call it? He's like, well, you're the neurotic guitarist, man. And he just said it. He was just like, this is so I give my friend Jim Foster full credit for basically it's a blessing and a curse too, because I had no interest in being a YouTuber or an online personality. And now it's like everybody calls me a content creator and a YouTuber. It's like I'm a musician, man. I'm a composer. And then when you get like a few million views online and then your downloads on your Spotify pale by comparison, you're like, I'm a content creator.
Exactly. Well, you don't get to choose how people perceive you, really, I guess, unfortunately. I think there's a quote I'm trying to find in my mind that I can't place it. But yeah, he's right, it's a perfect fit, it's a great name, and I can also listen to you talk about guitars for hours. What is tell me about your collection. I know you mentioned recently, which was a really interesting insight about you can play your 401k, right? You have such a collection that it's kind of taken the place of a traditional 401k. How has this thing evolved?
Okay, so well, let's be clear. If you are actually going to have a 401k, like with your work or whatever, it's a much better idea than investing in guitars. But for someone like me, I'm a DJ. I DJ high-end events, weddings, birthdays, corporate things. That's how I afford a lot of this stuff. People are like, are you rich? I'm just reckless with my money. But it's one of those things where, you know, over time, you kind of realize that like building a collection, it didn't start as an investment. It's a way of me justifying terrible spending habits. But because I did it so focused with such a way, like I have, like Dexter, he doesn't kill people that aren't bad people, and this he has this whole code. I have a code for which I've always bought things. So first and foremost, if it's not a deal, I don't care. So like when people say it's not good to invest in guitars, yeah, it's never good to buy high, but it's always good to buy low and then sell high in any economy. So for me, I've always like when I first got the bug of Reverb and Craigslist and scored my first $4,000 or $5,000 guitar for $800, and I got like, oh, I can keep doing this. I can keep every time I make any money that I don't need to spend to live, I can go and find another deal with some dum dum that wants to give me something vintage for crazy amount of money. So the first thing about it was I'm indiscriminate, right? Where I love PRS and I love Gibson, and that's what you see mostly. It's because I understand it. I know what I'm looking at. I tell people knowledge is power. So basically, when I say I have a 401k I can play, I have bought instruments that appreciate. I got in at the right price. And it's only, first off, an investment if you're willing to sell. I don't actively ever try to sell, but I have enough guitars and enough awareness now where people make me deals I can't refuse. So every time I've sold a guitar, I've won. There's maybe two or three times in my life I've broken even. I've never lost on a guitar ever, other than putting a 100-year-old guitar in a coffin case with a hyperclimate and literally ruining it because it got so humid that it warped the neck right off of it. Other than that, I've never lost. So when I say 401k, I would never have been saving up this kind of money that I spent on PRSs and Gibsons. So it's not comparative one to one because if I had the opportunity, there's no way I would not be eating steaks and going out on dates and all these things to like have money when I'm 65. But
Right.
because I can go and spend that money and have it now and enjoy it, and then maybe even 20 years from now, sell it for more. That's how I've kind of come up with this 401k analogy for people who are incapable of saving, but spend recklessly like me. If you're going to do it, at least do it in an intelligent way where you're getting it at the right price and you're buying things that are going to do well for you so that heaven forbid, my wife, this is long and drawn out, but she came to me the other day and she said, what if I get sick? Now she's a nurse and she makes really good money, better money than me. What are we going to do? Are we going to lose our house? And even our daughter, who's 19, was like, can't Ben just sell a guitar? She doesn't even have any perception of the value of these things. But heaven forbid I needed to go pay for chemo. I could take that Taylor right there. That's an entire year. So it's liquidatable assets, but it's yes, it's not technically a 401k.
Right. 401k you can play. Love it. Rhymes. Something to that. We also have to justify all these things to ourselves, which you're getting to as well. If your place caught on fire right now and you had two arms and you had to grab two guitars, what would you be running out with?
Fortunately, I do have two arms, so
Right.
this will work. Um, man, that's hard. Thankfully, I have insurance. So heaven forbid this actually did happen. This scenario happens. People ask this all the time. What would I do? I would start over. I'm like a little like an orb weaving spider that if you stamp on its web but don't kill it, it'll come back tomorrow and make the same beautiful web again. Um, I would take, I would probably take. Let me see. On an emotional level, this is people ask what's your favorite guitar of all your guitars. This is my first Gibson I got when I was 13 years old. It has a headstock injury. It's all messed up. But to this day, this is the guitar that means the most to me. So this is probably one. And then I have a 1954 Les Paul prototype that's probably a seven-figure guitar, and that's irreplaceable.
Right.
So I'd probably grab that.
Right. That works. That works. You say you take your emotion out of your guitar buying, but there's something there. So what are people, you mentioned that you've ruined a guitar. What should people know when starting a collection or even storing their like gigging guitars? What are some things that people should know?
So important, man. So I live in New England, right? And the weather fluctuates terribly. So Mark Twain said, if you don't like the weather in New England, just wait 5 minutes. But what people don't understand, and I made this mistake myself, a lot of people equate the temperature of a room to whether a guitar is happy. And that's not really true, right? It's the relative humidity. So if you go around my studio, everywhere, I have these little things called hydrometers, and you can buy them in packs of like 10 on Amazon. And the thing to bear in mind is that between 40 and 50% relative humidity is where guitars live happily. It's where paintings live happily, where artwork lives happily, your nose and your whole system lives happily because it's the proper amount of humidity for wood because wood expands and contracts. So if you ever see guitars with lots of the little crackety things that people notice and all that, like the crazing and the checking, as we call it, it's because the nitrocellulose over the years relative humidity, extreme temperature change. So, for example, if you take an acoustic guitar like the Taylor I have in the back, this is a true story. One of my buddies owned it and he gave it to this 16 or 17-year-old, and the 17-year-old in the middle of winter left it in his basement and then put it in his the trunk of his car and brought it over to me when I worked at Circuit City, and at like 15-degree weather opened it in the Circuit City building and we watched it crack in front of us.
Wow.
Took it from like 3% humidity into like 20% humidity, from 10 degrees to like 74 degrees inside
Right.
the store and ruined well, it needed a lot of work. So
Wow.
what people need to know, get a hydrometer, get one of my favorite jokes is from a guy named Stephen Wright, who says, I have both a humidifier and a dehumidifier, and I let them duke it out. And that's kind of what happens down here. So I actually have a dehumidifier over in the corner. So depending on what time of year, and sometimes even, what day, I will have my dehumidifier on or my humidifier so that if you come down to this room, it is always, 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 always 45 to 50% relative humidity, whether it's 60 degrees in the winter or 89 degrees in the summer. It is always 40 to 50%. And if you do that, you're going to keep your guitars happy. I have a Martin from 1840 over. It's never had anything done to it. And it's just because it's been kept in a perfect climate, just happy for almost 200 years.
Wow.
These things will last longer than us if you take care of them.
Wow. Yeah, that's great advice. And when you say relative, it's relative to outside, right? It's not just, what's the distinction there?
I don't actually know. That's a great question, Chris. I'm guessing it's just relative to what's in the room. I have them all over my room because one thing I found, especially being in New England, is that if you have like baseboard heating on one side and that you just have no heating on the other side, you may have 50% over here and 35% over
Wow.
there. And 35% at extended periods of time can crack your guitar.
Right.
I know this because one day, back in the day, before I knew anything about humidity, my apartment would get really cold in the winter. So I turned on my heat, my baseboard heating. And when I got home, 6 or 7 of my acoustics had all cracked because I had the house at 75 or 80 degrees. I'm warming my guitars, and all I did was dry the crap out of my guitars. It
Yeah.
didn't prevent anything. So when I tell you I've done everything the wrong way to find this out, trust me, don't ruin your Martin over me.
How many guitars do you have in your collection?
I have about 185 stringed instruments in this building. But like I said, I curate and have some instruments at different studios, but here physically at any given time, just under 200.
And how do you keep them set up? I know some people, friends of mine, who have some really nice guitars. It's like, oh, I want to go play this one, and you go to play it, and it's just like horribly set up, old strings, like frets are sticking out the side, whatever. Just like you have a bunch of guitars, and then they need attention.
It's sad. So like, let me dispel this rumor right now. So obviously people see that there's this many guitars in a room and they're like, this dude sucks. He doesn't play any of those. And bull. First off, if there was like time lapse video of me, even just last night, it's just me picking up 30 guitars in a night because I'm like, I wonder how single coils sound on a Jackson Soloist versus a Telecaster. And I'll spend 5 hours, but you had a very important question and I totally lost it.
Just people who have collections and
Oh, yes. Are they set up? So for me, what I was getting at is I play these and I have the people that come record in my studio. This is a recording studio. My friends and the people I work with constantly are coming over and we're working on stuff. But every single time I pick up a guitar, if it doesn't have awesome strings, I pretty much immediately will set it up, lemon oil the neck, the fretboard. I'll clean it all up, polish it, do the whole nine, and make it perfect. I also use Elixir strings, which I found last 2 to 3 times longer than almost anything else with the coated strings. So that if I don't, for example, play this guitar for 6 months, I'll pick it up and it'll play like brand new
Right.
simply because the other thing is I'm not playing live anymore. So when I'd play live, I'd sweat like, a priest at a Cub Scout meet. And this one set of strings would last me one gig. And by the end of it, it would be oxidized to the point where they were terrible. Your neck was horrible. I play very nimbly and nice, and I wash my hands and I wipe down my fretboard. So if you wipe down your fretboard, if you have perfect relative humidity and you take care of your stuff, your strings can last you 6 months, even a year if you're not heavy playing on them.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But I will go and walk around and see if there's anything bad. And if not, I'll make it a project of mine because there's nothing more obtuse to me than walking into some guy's place and you're like picking up my buddy Ernie, for example. a billionaire. He's awesome, super cool dude, has so many guitars, and you'll pick him up, and it's just like, oh wow, the brace is gonna fall out, dude. Of this 1915 Martin Triple O 28 worth more than my car, And I get it. I get it. You get to a certain point where it's like collect them all, and you're just happy. I play.
Right. Right. Um, that's interesting to hear. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like anything, when you see the problem and you address it right in the moment, then it doesn't, compound and you have, a collection of broken guitars. But that seems to be, in my experience, like the not the exception, but most people who have a ton of guitars, that's unfortunately the thing. This program is brought to you by TruckNuts. Is your guitar sounding thin? Get more sustain with TruckNuts, the solid steel sack for your tone. Get your TruckNuts today. What are your 2025 goals? Do you have something on your eye on something, or is it just whatever is a deal?
So I'm actually not like, a lot of people will hit me up and be like, "Do you want to buy my guitar?"
Mhm.
I don't want to buy any guitars.
Right.
If anything, I'm at a point where I trade guitars. So as far as the guitar community is concerned, I guess my hope would be to upgrade. Like, I'd rather trade 5 guitars for one at this point. I
Right.
mean, I'm not the guy that wants the 59 Les Paul just because it's a 59 Les Paul, but I
Sure.
would rather trade, $1,500 Telecaster and a $3,000 Les Paul, 5 of those for a $20,000, something cool and weird.
Right.
Everything I have is unique and weird. That's kind of my thing. As far as 2025, one with the Neurotic Guitarist is to keep making awesome programming, but hopefully create more passive income for myself. Because what a lot of people don't realize is, you know, even with millions of views and all that, like it's very, very hard to make a living being a quote unquote content creator. And that, in your case, and you're great at it, like you have the guitar, um, you got your books, your sauce book, and what I've learned being a YouTuber is I can't just go and be neurotic about a guitar. I have to create a class or sell someone on something and this and that. So my hope is that this year I can figure out how I can, excuse me, make more money doing this so that I can continue doing this without my wife hating me for doing it. And for also, feeling more accomplished because I do this out of passion because I love sharing history with instruments. And I obviously, like, I love sharing my collection. It's one of those things where I kind of feel stupid having all of this and not sharing it with somebody. So I'm glad I can share it with the world. But when you spend 50 hours on one video, because people
Yeah.
don't realize that. Like I
Right.
use multiple cameras. I shoot in 4K. I do proper lighting. So I sit there with a screen and I'll go sit in the middle of the room and then go back and try to adjust it and look at the screen and all that. And then I have to go edit it and try to make myself the least obnoxious version of myself or deliberately obnoxious. Um, it's just very time consuming. And when you make $24 off a video for spending 60 hours, it kind of hurts your feelings a little bit after a while.
Sure.
When the expectation was never to make money, no big deal. But when you're now people want videos from me every day, all the time. It's constantly chasing the dragon and it's become a full-time job. So I'd like to be compensated.
Right. Right. Well, there's value there. So I guess it's how to convert that. Yeah, we could talk about that offline a bit more, maybe. But do you have ideas about that and what form that might take? Is it about the
I
collection?
have a bunch of ideas and, there's certainly, people do Patreon, but it's one of those things you have to give people something. So I thought about doing Kemper profiles of all of my amps, um, offering Kemper packs, maybe doing some sort of tutorials. I don't really know because here's something about me that anyone that knows me, I I'm great at doing things and getting places and like, oh, I got Marty Friedman to play on a song with me and I got convinced somebody to fly me across the country to go play guitar on a song or I end up in the room with the right people.
Right.
And I'm relatively business savvy. I am just not good at doing business savvy things for myself.
Hmm.
It's like I can produce other people's vocals great in a studio. Me, when I'm by myself, I'm like, what would I ever do with that? Whereas I never run out of ideas for other people. So it's one of those things where I am my own worst enemy
I
as
hear
far
you.
as making things better.
I hear you. That's not uncommon. That's not uncommon amongst creatives. I certainly hear you on, needing there to be, return on all the time and all the editing, all, putting together a product that looks really good. It takes an ungodly amount of hours editing and uh, like storyboarding and all this kind of thing. It's just a ton. I definitely want to talk to you about Lost Symphony. Right? You mentioned that you played with Marty Friedman, more than once at this point, but super cool stuff and concept. The concept of like you as a classical pianist composing tunes and collaborating with some of the guitar gods, shred gods such as Marty Freeman, Jeff Loomis, right? Who else have you collaborated with?
Yeah, so Satchel, so Russ Parrish from Steel Panther, but also one of the greatest guitarists on the freaking planet. Joey Concepcion, who plays in Arch Enemy now, is with us. Jimmy Bell, who's Autograph and House of Lords, but he was runner-up to Zakk Wylde and Ozzy's band. We have David Aberzees from Pearl Jam on drums on a few songs, David Ellefson from Megadeth. Actually, one of the things that made me the happiest was so we had Ollie Herbert from All That Remains, who passed away, and this was a project between us. And when he passed, that was kind of when I reached out to Marty, and that's how we got Marty and Nuno. Was I basically wanted to do a tribute to my buddy, and when we used to argue, Ollie Herbert's one of the greatest guitarists that ever lived on the planet, anyway. But when he'd come down and we'd work on Lost Symphony, he'd always be like, "Well, what if we got Marty Friedman?" I'd be like, well, what if we got Nuno? Dude, could you imagine if like Nuno? And he was a huge Testament fan. So he's always like, but how about Alex Skolnick? And I didn't even know Alex Skolnick. Like I really didn't even know Testament until he played on my record. And then I got to meet Alex, and Alex and I have become friends. But like putting Nuno, Alex, and Marty, this is an example of like when I put my mind towards something, I wanted to do that for Ollie. So again, not for money. I don't do well when I try to do things for money, but I was able to convince, and trust me, like it took me like 3 years to convince Nuno Betancourt to do anything.
Right.
But to get them all on a song was amazing. And, I've been lucky in that, working with all these people, like it's just been my hustle, right? But the idea was I composed the songs on the piano, and then give these awesome kind of like skeletal ideas to people and then like let them run loose. And I would, message all kinds of, Jeff Loomis, and Jeff was like, yeah, man, I love this. But, and he actually even said to me at one point, send me another one. And then got mad at me when I sent him the song I did with with him and Marty Friedman. That was like the third or fourth song that Jeff and I did. And he was just like, how come you've been holding this out on me? You know what I mean? So I built these relationships with these people. But one thing actually for 2025, so the thing is with Lost Symphony, the idea of that band was I wanted to do exactly what I wanted to do without any preconceived notion of trying to be popular, being on the radio. So like I'm a DJ, right? I played the most popular music in the world. So what do I like? Well, I like classical music. I love neoclassical like Ingve. I love the bombast of Randy Rhoads and all that, but I also like orchestra stuff. And I thought to myself, well, what happens if like we made this super shred band with no vocals, just straight to the end of November Rain, and just made that the whole thing? And I started demoing out ideas, and it started off with me going on the internet and asking people who they thought the greatest guitarists that I had never heard of were. And two guys kept coming up, a guy named Kelly Karaluck and a guy named Conrad Simon. Now, Kelly is the guitarist for Lost Symphony. And I basically reached out to him and said, hey, man, I'm doing this crazy project. I'm looking for amazing guitarists. Everyone keeps sending me to you. Your stuff's insane. What do you think? Send me a song. So I sent him a song called Leave Well Enough Alone, which to this day is one of my favorite songs I've ever written. And he was like, this is insane. And I said, what do you think of this guy, Conrad Simon? He's also from Canada, which is where Kelly's from. I've never met him, but I've wanted to reach out to that guy for a long time. I've actually even written out a bunch of his music. Okay. So Kelly reached out to Conrad. So basically the first song we ever did was Kelly Karaluck and this insane dude, Conrad Simon, on this song. And it was so crazy that when I started sending stuff to people, I would just send with Conrad and Kelly what they were doing. And this was almost a decade ago, because it's crazy, because in that period of time, and I'm sure you know this, Chris, Uh, when I first started, hyper shredding wasn't as much of a thing. You had the Jason Beckers and the Rusty Coolies and some of these insane Frank and Bali, but like you didn't see everyone on the internet sweep picking. You didn't see everyone doing this like, oh, 220 beats per minute. You know what I mean? Like you had freak shows like Marty Friedman and Jeff Loomis. You had some crazy guys out there like Michelangelo Badio, right? They were there, but they weren't everywhere. So I thought that that'd be cool. But in the period since we first started doing this album, or the first album, everyone, the entire, all children have been born that can play better than I do. So where it was originally about like, let's push like these virtuosic kind of things, now it's just like, I want to make the best music I possibly can. And the thing was, it was originally to get guests like Marty Friedman and Jeff Loomis and all these people. But Kelly, for example, is so freaking good. And the guys that I play with, like we have Siobhan Cronin on violin, who is one of the greatest violinists on the planet. She's played in Trans-Siberian Orchestra. She's been with the Miami Pops. She plays in Star Set now. But like even if you watch The Queen's Gambit and you hear violin, just a little violin line, that's Siobhan.
Right.
So it's like I started getting annoyed because when we released these first records, everyone would send me their friends or every guitarist and be like, you should do a song with Gus G. You should do a song with Michelangelo Badia. And it's like, I don't need any of these people. So the future of Lost Symphony, we've got a bigger band. Now I have Kelly. I have that guy Hector Hellion, who I showed you. And between Kelly, Hector, myself, and Corey on guitar, we have two new cellists. We have a girl named Susanna, who plays in Starset. We have another unbelievable player, Marco, who plays with Hans Zimmer. And like if you go watch the Dune soundtrack, all the crazy sounding cello, that's Marco. They're all in Lost Symphony. So the music we're making now is the same stuff, but as opposed to relying on guests' names, Hector and Kelly are playing stuff at the Jeff Loomis, Marty Friedman level without having to have those guys. Because the cool thing about Kelly, for example, when we had him on our band, when you'd send stuff to Marty or you'd send stuff to all these Joey Concepcion or whatever, Kelly's so good that they were always, everyone was just always taken aback by him. So it wasn't a hard sell. So now that I put Kelly against every one of my heroes and realize that not only can he hold his own, like there's video of Kelly literally sweep picking harmonies with Jeff Loomis. He learned those on the spot. Jeff just did, and he just, within like an hour of me sending him, he sends me back, like, I think I'm going to do this. Like, he's so good that I'm like, Kelly doesn't need a Marty Friedman anymore. In fact, I don't want an Alex Skolnick to overshadow what we're doing because I don't want anyone ever telling me again that I need any guitarist to do what I'm already doing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, this stuff is really strong, really strong.
Thank you.
Do you guys have? Because it sounds like you're here, there, and everywhere. Would you play a live show, or do you have plans to put together, a video project that showcases the new lineup?
So the live show thing, probably not. Not unless something happens and it's like someone comes to me and goes, "Hey, I have $100,000 budget and we want to do one show." Um, I've actually had some promoters come to me and say we would book Lost Symphony, and it's just like the logistics of it is insane.
Yeah.
And to play at that level and to do it perfectly live, again, I just went and saw my friends in Trans-Siberian Orchestra. I'm good friends with Chris Caffery and from Sabotage and Roddy Chong, who's the lead violinist on the East Coast tour. They're doing that right. But they also have they sell out 2 shows a night at the Centrum. Like it's insane. So to be able to put on a show with the proper, like we're competing with Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And then Hans Zimmer, which is who Marco plays with, you go see him. He's got like a 60 or 70 piece band. And you could even see the bars that they're playing on the big screen. They're all fall. That's how you'd have to do it. And I don't have any delusions that that would lose a ton of money. So that, no, but the video part, absolutely. Because what we've done in the past is we've kind of hid behind artwork and things. And like we just did a cover of Hungarian Rhapsody by Franz Liszt. And, I love that song because I saw it in Tom and Jerry, like the 1950s Tom and Jerry. They actually have Tom playing piano and Jerry's hiding in the piano, and they play from this amazing piano piece that I've been listening to all of my life. Later is in Roger Rabbit. Those that song was so cool because I saw Roger Rabbit, Daffy Duck, and Bugs Bunny fighting over dueling pianos to play it, or Tom and Jerry. So if I'm going to do a video of it, you either need to see people shredding or have something visually awesome to keep them engaged for 8 minutes. So I'm under no delusion that when we re-emerge with Lost Symphony in 2025, there's going to have to be a visual component that is just as strong as the musical component, which has not been there, I don't think, to this point.
Right. Yeah. It's a big ask to keep people engaged in that way, you know. I don't know what to do about that. I guess think about who does that really well. I'd have to think about it. And then like marrying the right aesthetic to what you do as well. It can be done. It can be done. I'm sure you will crack that nut and do an amazing job on it. But the fact that you have these different things going on, as we mentioned earlier, like a lot of people buy into one aspect of what someone does as a content creator or a musician, and there's all this other depth there that they might not know about. This program is brought to you by Metropug, the metronome you can feel. Now with penetrating pulse technology. Feel the beat with Metropug. So I have some questions about, since you're so knowledgeable about PRS and Gibson, obviously Gibson's been around a lot longer, and the vintage guitar market, the collector market is a fickle thing. Do you foresee PRS appreciating in that kind of way, or is like the classic rock guitar god arc that kind of informed the collectability, is that over, or do you think the PRS will appreciate significantly?
Well, so there's a lot of people that argue about this online. I think that right now that the early PRSs, the early production PRS, not pre-production, people confuse this. People can think that the stuff that was made outside the Stensonville factory, which was their first factory on whatever street it was pre-production. 1985 to 1991, I call the sweet switch era, because they had the sweet switch, but standard from 1985 to 1981, they had Brazilian rosewood fretboards. So anything you got from PRS other than the CE24s, which had Indian rosewood, were all Brazilian rosewood. They are also not made with CNC machines, so they weren't mass produced. I don't think it makes any difference. I don't care, but those were the quote unquote small batch PRS, right? So I have a 1986 PRS with a serial number of 677. It's the 677th PRS ever made when they're in like 400,000 or something like that. So if you go back to Fender, you got the 677th Fender ever made. It's worth a lot of money. And the thing is, it's like someone was arguing with me online today saying, well, everyone thought Parker's would be collectible. PRS has been around since 1985 as a company. And even before that, he was making guitars for all kinds of people, Santana being a big one, Peter Frampton being a big one, Ted Nugent, Joe Perry, Slash. They all played Paul Reed Smith guitars at some point. Brad Whitford from Aerosmith. He's still making more guitars now. So back in the 90s, when I first saw a PRS and I saw the Birds, I was like, now everybody has one because they're now making SE models overseas and they've become ubiquitous, which is good and bad. It's good in the sense that Paul Reed Smith has become a brand that's going to stay. It's now Gibson, Fender, Paul Reed Smith for me. But they're also pumping out guitars, right? So the more supply and demand. The thing is about those 1985 to 1991, they're not making anymore. They're not getting any less rare. And because of how much people love PRS and how much these have become ubiquitous, they have not become any less desirable. So even though the market sucks on and off, we're going, inflation's a thing, if you go and buy this Paul Reed Smith new for $5,500, which is what you'd pay for an artist top Paul Reed Smith Custom 24 from Brian's Guitars, if you buy one new, totally worth it to somebody who wants one. You're never going to make money on the guitar. Not anytime soon, and certainly not any dividends.
Right.
Me got this guitar for $1,800. I might be able to sell it for $3,500. So this is not, but almost double street value, probably what this is worth and this isn't even a 1991 to 85 to 91. The reason I say 85 to 91 is because I remember in the mid 90s, there was a 59 Les Paul that walked into the store I worked at in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I think they wanted like $7,500 for it. And I looked at my boss. I was like, there's a guitar that's worth 7,500 bucks. What that? Is there cocaine inside of the guitar? Like, what? And that guitar now worth $400,000. So that was a wake up for me, because if I had gone back to when I first worked at a music store and bought all these guitars, I mean, I remember they had a Dan Armstrong clear lucite guitar, like what Joe Perry plays, where those guitars are $6,000. I was gonna buy one for $180, and my boss said these things sound terrible, and I'm like, but it looks cool. He's like, they're terrible. You don't want one. $180 could have sold it for $5,000 tomorrow. So I have lived through going, I know now what I knew then. So now, in just the last 5 or 6 years, I started buying stuff from 85 to 91. And, 7 or 8 years ago, you could buy a standard 24 with a Brazilian rosewood fretboard with the inlays and all that, $1,400.
Right.
I bought 3 of them in 2 months, all cherry. Now you can't even buy an SE new that has, it's like that. Nevertheless, with Brazilian rosewood, nevertheless, not made with CNC machines, nevertheless, being under 10,000 serial number, which is really another big thing that people look for. How low is the serial number? All these things. So my belief is, if you know what you're looking at, the reason I have Gibson and PRS and mainly is because I obsessively, neurotically know about this stuff. So I can kind of almost see the deals. It comes down to, like, you can make money and anything will be worth more if you just buy it initially at the right price. So for me, I'll give you another perfect example. My buddy John, I had a 1987 PRS custom 24. I bought for $2,100 on a Monday, and he was working with me in the studio, and I said he was trying to get into collecting guitars, and I said, I got such a good deal on this, and he goes, if you find another one for that kind of deal, let me know. 5 days later, I find another 1987 PRS in the same scarlet red, same 5 digits in the serial number, just flipped around.
Interesting.
I showed it to John. John kind of started balking at me, and I don't know. Are you sure? But there's a lot of them coming up. So when he waited too long, I literally in front of him bought the same guitar again. And that PRS Custom 24 that I bought for $2,100, I traded for my bucket head that's worth now $10,000. Traded that in a $600 Ormsby for a bucket head. So, and I did that 2 years ago. So I try to explain to people that it can be done if you know what you're looking at. And when I said online that I'd keep buying them at that, like if I could find a 1987 PRS for $2,100 right now, I would still buy it, because even though I wouldn't want to keep it because I need to buy things for my house, I could easily flip it, at least get $3,000 for it, because, well, I know I can.
Right. Right. So yeah, we're in it. It's not something that may happen in the future, or the time has arrived for PRS in that market. And as you're saying, it's about the uniqueness of the deal and how much, the leverage, how much you know about it. I have one more game for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready always for games.
Keep one, sell one, smash one. Go.
Okay. Am I supposed to tell you the ones I'm going to keep, sell, and
Okay.
smash?
You only get 3 guitars out of everything you have. You have to keep one, you have to sell one, and you have to smash one.
Okay. Well, if I was going to keep one, I'd keep the Nighthawk I showed you. If I was going to sell one, I'd probably sell. Well, I might as well just bring it on. If I was going to sell one, not that I'm going to sell it, but if I was, this Les Paul right here is definitely worth more than my house. So I'd sell this one, and then I would smash this Chinese Fesley guitar that they sent me, which as much as I like it, it's already causing me problems. So I would never buy a guitar that cheap. It's cool for what it is, but my buddy yesterday went like this, and you know that there's a harmonic there. There was no harmonic on that one. And I've been playing it for like 2 weeks now, and I never noticed it, but it's just got some little fret issues. And I'm like, I've never, you get
The
it.
fret is off so much that there's no harmonic. Well,
Well, you can go next to it, and it perfectly rings 80% quieter. I'm
mhm.
like, wow. So it must be like a millionth of a millimeter, but it's just enough to
Right.
ruin it.
And
So
what is it?
yeah, I
This is a
break that one.
prototype you have here?
This is a this is Les Paul's 1954 roadshow professional roadshow prototype. As he and the reason I use that name is because I have access to Les Paul's ledgers. So Les Paul kept a ledger of all the guitars that he owned. They're currently in the Gibson vault. So if you go inside Gibson to their vault and they have like their 59 Les Paul, whatever, behind all the bookcases and stuff, there's a drawer underneath and you pull it out. And in there, Les Paul's all of his records. And in there, it's the G5 Les Paul Roadshow Professional Prototype. And that's what this is.
Wow. And how did you get your hands on this?
This this guitar is the most ridiculous serendipitous story ever. So basically, there's a guy named Neil. There's a dude in the industry, Neil from Neil's Guitars, right? And he had this guitar up for like $80,000, and said it's a prototype. He's not. He said it's a 1958 prototype. It was used by Les Paul, and it came in a case that Les Paul took in 1952 to go play for the Queen of England. So what a lot of people don't realize is that, and I didn't know this, Les Paul was way more than just a guitarist. He was tantamount to Thomas Edison, for example. He actually invented multi-track recording. And at one point in the 50s, he was one of the most famous people in the entire world. So when he went over to England, he was like an ambassador of the United States. So like this wasn't just like, oh, he was touring and having fun, and this was like a big deal. So this came in one of three cases he took over to England. It had the Queen's freighter mark on it. In 1989, one of those cases sold for $19,000. It was Mary Ford's case. Les Paul's case has been missing. It's with Neil, which he found it on. Well, I'll start with how Neil found this, because I had a conversation after having this guitar for 3 years. Neil and I finally talked and compared notes because we were a little ambivalent of each other at one point. But Neil found this guitar online with the case for $1,500, like 25, 30 years, 20, at the beginning of eBay, and took a chance. Just the case was all wrapped in duct tape. He didn't even know what was going on with it. When he got it, he spent like crazy amount of time. He said he almost killed himself trying to use chemicals to take off all of this stuff, and then realized that when he opened this, it had no pickups. It basically was just a husk of a guitar. So it was all these knobs and all of that, but nothing underneath. And it was missing. A bunch of stuff was broken on it. And he spent years researching this guitar, including reaching out to Tom Doyle, who was Les Paul's sideman for like 45 years or something. Tom Doyle told him it was in 1958, and then refused to fix it for him, because Tom Doyle, between you and I, it seems to me, wants to own the market on Les Paul. So like the $1 million Les Paul guitar that sold, that was Tom Doyle's. The $500,000 custom that looks like the Black Beauty version of this, Tom Doyle's. So I don't think Tom Doyle wanted another guitar of this magnitude on the market. So Neil spent years trying to put this back together, and he made it basically look like what it did in the 50s, where he put like these black covers on P90s. He put it up on the internet for 80 grand. And not one person reached out to them, because this is an ugly guitar. And, no one, even looking at a 54 Les Paul custom, would say that this is normal. Nevertheless, spent 80 grand on it. And Neil had the story about 90% right. But the first thing is when I went to Gibson and I talked to my friend Matt Kaler, who's the vice president of Gibson, and I told him that this was a 58, he looked at me like I was an idiot. And I kept going on about it, and he's like, it's not a 58. And I'm like, what? No, it's a 58, dude. And he's like, no, it's not. Tom Doyle, Les Paul's guy, says it's a 58. I'm Matt. I'm the vice president of Gibson. I'm telling you it's not. So that's when I asked Matt, how do you know this? And the thing is, anyone that knows anything about Les Pauls, the position of the logo on the headstock will tell you the year almost every time, or close to. Where this headstock is, it could only be a 54, 55. And basically Matt sent me down this rabbit hole going down all these things to kind of like compare. And once you see it, and I have a pick stitch somewhere I can send you, Chris, you can't unsee it. This is without question a 1954-55. So the first thing I realized is that Neil had the date wrong. I think Tom deliberately gave him the misinformation. The other thing is the pickups and the electronics were not correct. So anyone who's going to spend $80,000 or $100,000 on a guitar, they're going to want to have the right stuff. Before I knew any of this, I basically saw it dropping online 80, 60, 50. I called one of my buddies. Now, I raised a bunch of money for Jason Becker, $250,000 to buy 3 of his guitars. My friend, who helped me, paid for it, who appreciates Jason Becker and me basically telling him the story and sharing all of that and went out of his way to do it. I also curate stuff for him, and he has me find unique instruments. And I said, hey, man, there's this crazy Les Paul online. It was $80,000. Now he wants 50. I think we can go in and give him 40. I don't really know what it is, but I'm telling you, I think it's worth it. He's like, why do you think it's worth it? And I wrote like this whole like report back and forth to him and all of that. Fine, I'll buy it. Bought this guitar for $44,000. Gets sent to my buddy, who, by the way, I told, this is the thing that really annoyed Neil when I told him originally. I was like, he's like, oh, is this going to you? And I'm like, no, it's going to my friend. And he goes, what's he going to do with it? Oh, he'll probably put it in like his storage room and like forget about it. And Neil spent years figuring, he's like, but he was dealing with family stuff, so he needed the money. And he took the money, but it hurt him. He actually told me later that he'd almost asked for the case back. I was like, that would have never happened. So anyway, they sent it to my buddy. He forgets about it. It's like in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where the Nazis get the Ark of the Covenant and they put it back in with all the other boxes and to be forgotten about. That's what my buddy did. Months later, I'm at a guitar show in Natick, Massachusetts. And I'm walking around, and I had taken the day off from work. I had my camera crew there for the Neurotic Guitarist, and it was terrible. There was nothing there that was any good. It was like a bunch of cheap stuff. Like I want to go and see stuff that like I revere. And it was really not a whole lot of stuff. And then all of a sudden, I get to one corner of this room, of this hotel, and there's a train track, a little note that says, this is the train track that Les Paul stole to make, like to figure out how to make the first pickup. And then there's a little old-timey telephone on this table. Again, not behind glass, not anything, just sitting on the table. This is what Les Paul used to make the first pickup. And then I start looking, and there's all these acetates that say Les Paul and all this crazy stuff. And then I look over, and there's these 2 guys, and they're holding a 1968 Les Paul Custom into a Falcon amp that I have over there. And they're like, hi, I'm Jim. Guy comes up to me, hi, I'm Jimmy. Nice to meet you. I was Les Paul's best friend. You're Les Paul's best friend? He goes, yeah, look at all this stuff. He takes me around, grabs me by my hand, and starts. And now, meanwhile, I thought this was all like, this day was ruined. I'm here with my camera crew guy, and I'm like, can I get a microphone on you? He's like, well, first come see Les Paul's guitar. He puts this guitar in my hand, not this one, but a 68 Les Paul Custom that belonged to Les Paul. Gets this braided cable, plugs me in to this amplifier. All of a sudden, people start kind of like flocking over. Like, oh, this is Les Paul's kitchen amp. He had it here for 45 years, and he played through it, and blah. I'm like, wait a minute. You just gave me a Les Paul's guitar. There was amp. He goes, and they're the same strings he had on it when he passed. Well, these are his strings. Next thing I know, I'm playing in front of like 150 people on Les Paul's guitar through Les Paul's amp. And I'm like, who are you guys again? And it turns out that Jimmy Wysocki is the mayor of Mahwah, New Jersey. And in 1981, Les Paul called the police asking if someone would plow his driveway. And Jimmy did and broke his mailbox. And ever since then, they were best friends, literally to the point where Jimmy delivered the eulogy at Les Paul's funeral. Jimmy brought Les Paul to the hospital for the last time. Jimmy still took care of his girlfriend up until a few weeks ago when she passed at over 100 years old. So when I tell you that like this guy was his confidant, it was crazy, but I'm like, why are you in a hotel lobby doing this? And basically, Jimmy made a deal on Les's deathbed, essentially, that he would take all of Les's stuff that he had accumulated, that Les gave him in his life, and bring it around to people to touch, see, and feel. So when I was there, Jimmy's handing out guitar strings because Les would keep every set of strings from every show, and he would write on the show, like what show he did, what date, just giving out strings to little kids. And he gave me some bottle caps that like apparently came out of like, he had like a bottle cap thing that they would all drink. And so all the bottle caps would go in, giving me bottle caps from Les Paul's bar in his basement. He gave me a bunch of signed music, and I'm sitting there freaking out. And he's just going, "Oh, it's just stuff, dude." And I'm like, well, and this is when I realized, I'm like, well, my friend just got this white guitar. I mean, oh, excuse me, I didn't say white guitar. Just got a guitar from Les. And before I said anything, Jimmy looks at me and he goes, "The white one?" I'm like, "You know about this guitar?" He goes, "I saw it online." He goes, "But he doesn't have the pickups, does he?" I'm like, no, it doesn't have the pickups. They're not original. He goes, "I do."
Whoa.
What? Yeah, Les Paul gave them to me in 1982. They've been on my wall. So I become really good friends with Jimmy, and I start filming some stuff. You can actually see me and him talking to Billy Gibbons on my channel. We have an episode a little bit about this guitar, somewhat about Jimmy's relationship with Les. But essentially, I went to Jimmy's house and purchased these pickups, which are prototype staple back pickups that you would find in a 1954, 55 Les Paul Custom, only in the rhythm position, even though they're a pair. So he took apart at least two guitars to do this. And basically he rewound them to be low impedance. So for people that don't understand what that means, when I restored this guitar, it made no noise because low impedance pickups, you have a high impedance output. Because if you get a 1970s Les Paul recording model, it actually has a little thing like this. It's a transformer inside that takes a low impedance signal and makes it loud enough that you can hear it through a normal amplifier. And that was one of the crazy things that Jimmy would do. But long story short, it took me 3 years to figure out all the electronics in this guitar and what it was. And I tried having Tom Doyle, who was, again, Les Paul's guy, restore it. Tom was kind of into it and then wasn't into it. And basically, I was pretty sure he didn't want me to sell this for $1 million. So it was pretty much good luck figuring it out. Well, first off, I figured out they were wrong. It's a 54, 55. Secondly, my buddy Josh, who's an absolute electronics nerd, and I told him, "I need your help." Well, we went online and somebody sent me a video of Tom Doyle explaining the first Black Beauty from Les Paul. It's the same guitar, except his has newer pickups in it. This, we believe, was stolen in the 60s. That's how this got out. Turns out, it wasn't stolen. In the 60s, Les Paul his son managed some people, and one of those guys was a guy named Bill Cuddyhook, who happened to be the first guitarist in a band called the E Street Band before they became the E Street Band and joined Bruce Springsteen. Anyway, his name is on this case, and he didn't steal it. In fact, Les owed him money and said, "Grab any guitar you want." So we grabbed the case that said #1 and left with it. And we believe that after Les died that he very much regretted that he released this guitar. Now, it had no pickups and stuff in it because Les never wanted to be reverse engineered. So he was famous for taking things apart and putting it in parts and all of that. So 50 years later, 60 years later, actually 70, if you want to think about when this really started, I put the pickups back in. So it's kind of like repairing the Liberty Bell. And after watching that video from Tom Doyle, I realized this is not a tone. This is a 10-way decade switch, which
Wow.
has a bunch of capacitors. Gibson won't make you one, but Josh will. Bass, treble, volume, and this is a three-way tone, which is not really a tone. It just controls which of these things work. You have a phase switch, and you have a transformer. Now, when I found out I needed a transformer, my buddy Josh found the guy that made transformers for Les Paul, and that guy made the exact same Les Paul transformer he designed for Gibson in the 70s for the recording model for me. Now, the only thing that wasn't working as far as all this original stuff was this toggle switch. And I know people like original things. Jimmy has boxes and boxes of new old stock that Les Paul had around, including pickups, knobs, and this exact toggle switch. So this toggle switch that we put back in that was broken is actually from Les Paul's new old stock from his bench. So this guitar is now restored completely back to how it was in 1955.
Wow. That's an incredible story. That is an incredible story. I'm sure other guitars you have are similarly storied, maybe not to that extent and not as synchronistically inclined. But it's been so great to finally connect after seeing you online for so long, and to get a sneak peek inside your collection and your mind. So I'm excited to see what you do next in 2025, and what's coming through your door next week.
I'm very excited for that. And I'm excited to see what you do, Chris, because I got to be real with you. You know, I'm always trying to get better. And it's like you have these amazing exercises on your page that sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I should do that seventh arpeggio and that phrasing and go from that one to that. Like, and I'm still having aha moments following you. So I encourage anybody that has a quest for knowledge as much about how this stuff is built to learn about what you're actually doing with the instrument, because it doesn't matter what guitar you have. It's really comes down to you. And I wish I could play like you, Chris.
Thank you. We'll just strive to be better all the time. Better than not better than anyone, but better than your previous
Your
self.
previous self, yes. Well, happy New Year's, man. And it's such a pleasure to sit down and actually talk to you. And I appreciate you very much. And thank you for having me on your show, man. This is really cool.
My pleasure, Benny. Great to meet you as well.
Awesome, dude. I look forward to catching up with you. And if anyone hasn't bought your cookbook, get on it.
Let me know if you want to play a round of this or that, a custom 22 or a custom 24.
I'd rather have a 24.
Modern Eagle or Les Paul 1960 reissue?
A modern Eagle, because what a beautiful guitar. And I have a 1960 reissue. It's actually my first Les Paul.
Santana PRS or Buckethead Les Paul?
Have both of those guitars, and I traded the Santana PRS because PRS makes beautiful, beautiful guitars, but some of them don't speak to me the same way. I got to tell you, that Buckethead Les Paul, man, that thing, ridiculous.
Les Paul Supreme 125th or Orianthi PRS?
Oh, man. You know, I have a 125th anniversary, and I'd rather have it only just because I'm in a group on the internet called the Gibson Supreme Group. I love them, and just having one's like a badge of honor. But I do love the Orianthi. But for me, the problem is that if I was going to have like a $10,000 PRS, I don't want to play somebody else's like model, because anyone that would recognize the Orianthi guitar for 10 grand is going to think I'm just copying Orianthi. And I know her a little bit to say hi to, and she's so much better than me. I wouldn't want anybody to confuse me and her.
It's like wearing a dude's jersey, I guess.
I know, right?
Speaking of this or that, sleeves or no sleeves?
Well, obviously no sleeves on my channel. And I only did that, kept doing that because I realized it set me apart from everybody, because it annoyed so many people by cutting off the sleeves to my shirts. They're like, you look like a hooligan. I'm like, good.